Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The Daily Brew Cafe, a cozy little nook in the heart of the city, glowed with soft amber lighting from hanging lamps, filtering through rows of old bookshelves. The scent of freshly roasted coffee mingled with the aroma of baked goods, creating a space that felt both intimate and lively. Small wooden tables were neatly arranged, each adorned with a tiny lavender vase. Amelia Bennett stepped into the cafe. Her white canvas sneakers, slightly smudged with flour from her morning shift, squeaked softly. Her gray Sweet Haven Bakery t-shirt was speckled with smudges of butter and dough, and her sleeves were rolled up, revealing flour-dusted arms. Her chestnut-brown hair was messily tied up in a bun, with a few unruly strands clinging to her forehead. In her hands, she held a still-warm croissant wrapped hurriedly in parchment paper, her trophy from the oven, grabbed on the way out. She glanced at her watch. 5 minutes late. Great. A perfect start to a date she didn't even want to go to, she thought. Lips curling into a resigned frown, Amelia wasn't the blind date type. In fact, she didn't have time for romance. Between baking pastries, writing her recipe blog under the pseudonym Miss Baker, and taking care of her cat, Muffin, her life already felt full. But Sophie Reed, her best friend since high school, had begged her to fill in for a last-minute emergency date. I got stuck at a photo shoot. Amy, please, just sit there for 10 minutes, say a few things, and bounce. Sophie had pleaded over the phone, voice syrupy sweet, and since Amelia wasn't great at saying no, here she was, feeling completely out of place in the most undate-like outfit possible. She scanned the cafe, looking for the target based on Sophie's description. A man around 30, wearing a gray suit, neat hair, looked like he stepped out of Forbes magazine. Easy enough. The cafe wasn't crowded, and near the window sat a man with perfect posture, flipping through a financial newspaper, Julian Pierce. Amelia took a deep breath, smoothed her shirt, not that it helped, and walked over. Julian Pierce didn't like wasting time. As the CEO of Pierce Ventures, he was used to tight schedules, high-stakes meetings, and million-dollar decisions. This date, arranged by his longtime mentor Victor Stone, was a social obligation he had reluctantly agreed to. You need to lighten up, Julian, Stone had said with a wink. Meeting a nice girl might do you some good. Julian's plan was to wrap this up in 5 minutes, politely decline, and get back to his waiting spreadsheets. But when Amelia walked up to the table, Julian nearly dropped his newspaper. He had pictured someone polished, maybe a lawyer or a marketing executive, with styled curls and a perfect, rehearsed smile. Instead, standing before him was a girl in a flour-stained t-shirt, wind-blown hair, cradling a croissant like it was a rare gem. She looked like she had run straight from the kitchen. Julian frowned slightly, yet his eyes, despite his logic, were drawn to her flour-covered hands, clutching the pastry like it might float away. "Hi, are you Julian, right?" Amelia spoke, her voice a little shaky but trying to sound casual. She placed the croissant on the table, like it was an obstacle to get rid of. "I'm Amelia. Well, I'm here in place of Sophie." She had something come up. Julian blinked, trying to process a stand-in. This was new. "In place of her?" he repeated, voice low and even, like he was questioning an employee. She was too busy to come herself. Amelia gave an awkward smile and took the seat across from him, fingers absent-mindedly picking at the parchment paper. Yeah, photo shoot. Sophie's a freelance model. She said I just had to sit here, chat a little, and then done." She shrugged, brown eyes gleaming with a touch of mischief. "I don't usually do blind dates, so I might be a little awkward. Hope you don't mind." Julian watched her, trying to keep a neutral expression, though the corner of his mouth twitched. Awkward was a mild way to describe the situation. The girl in front of him was unlike anyone he'd ever met at corporate galas or charity events. She spoke like she was chatting with an old friend, completely unguarded and refreshingly unfiltered, and, oddly enough, he found that interesting. Realizing she was rambling, Amelia searched for something to fill the silence. "Do you like coffee? This place makes a great latte. Or are you more of a tea person?" "I like both. But today I just baked a fresh batch of croissants." She gestured at the pastry. "It's still warm. Want to try it?" Julian looked at the croissant, then at her. "You brought a pastry here?" His tone held surprise, not judgment. "Yeah, I just finished my shift. Didn't have time to change," Amelia replied, scratching the back of her neck. "I'm a pastry chef. This one's a new recipe. Bit of honey and orange zest. Sounds weird, but it's good." He raised an eyebrow, not answering right away. Part of him wanted to say no, he didn't eat sweets, and this was supposed to be a 5-minute date, but there was something about her expectant gaze, her open enthusiasm about a simple croissant, that made him hesitate. "You made it yourself?" he asked, voice softening slightly. "I did. I even have a baking blog. Not to brag, but I'm kind of a big deal. Anonymously. My nickname's Miss Baker." She laughed, dimples showing. "I know it's silly." Julian didn't laugh, but his eyes lit up, as if holding back a reaction. "Miss Baker," he repeated in a low voice. "You're definitely one of a kind." Amelia shrugged, unsure if he was being sincere or sarcastic. "Thanks, I guess. So, what do you do?" Sophie said something important. "Finance, right?" "Investments," Julian replied briefly, setting the newspaper aside. "I run an investment firm." He paused, waiting for her to probe. Most people did, curious about his wealth or status, but Amelia just nodded. Like he'd said, he worked in a regular office job. "Sounds busy," she said, then gestured to the croissant. "Anyway, try it. If it's bad, be honest. I can take it." Julian looked at the pastry, then at her again. There was something in her sincerity, completely unpolished and unpretentious, that felt foreign to him. A man used to a world of calculation and precision, he picked up the croissant and took a small bite. The buttery texture melted on his tongue, blending with a hint of honey and delicate citrus. Delicious. Genuinely delicious. He tried to maintain a straight face, but his eyes lit up briefly, as if surprised by the revelation. "Well?" Amelia asked, tilting her head, eyes sparkling. Clearly eager for feedback, Julian set the pastry down, wiped his hands with a napkin. "Not bad," he said evenly, though his gaze betrayed a flicker of delight. Amelia smiled, as if she noticed it too, though she said nothing. The date lasted far longer than either of them expected. Amelia went on about her baking, the time she burned a whole batch of macarons, her cat, Muffin, who rejected most of her food. Julian, though usually quiet, found himself listening more than he intended. He didn't understand why he was still sitting there when he should have left ages ago. Maybe it was the way she laughed, or how she flailed her hands and sent flour flakes onto the table, or how she casually called him gray suit guy without a hint of hesitation. Eventually, half an hour had passed. Amelia checked her watch and gasped. "Oh no, I have to go. Muffin's probably starving." She stood up, leaving the croissant on the table. "Thanks for not getting mad that I came instead of Sophie," she said, grinning, dimples showing. "Hope you're not too disappointed." Julian gave a small nod, eyes still on her. "Not disappointed," he said, his voice low, but more genuine than he meant it to be. She waved and walked out of the cafe, her figure disappearing around the corner. Julian Pierce sat at the table in the Daily Brew, his finger tapping lightly on the edge of the financial newspaper, his gaze unconsciously following Amelia Bennett as she left. The croissant she'd left behind, now only half remaining after his test bite, sat tilted on the plate, as if daring his perfect sense of control. He had meant to end this date in 5 minutes. A polite refusal, a brief handshake, then back to the world of numbers and strategy. But 5 minutes had stretched longer than planned, and he was still sitting there, feeling as if a strange wind had just blown through. Amelia. Her name echoed in his head, along with the image of flour-dusted hands, dimpled smiles, and a non-stop voice chatting about pastries, cats, and a blog called Miss Baker. She had admitted she was filling in for a friend, some Sophie, with a frankness so naive it was disarming. No one in Julian's world, from business partners to employees, ever spoke to him without a hint of calculation. But she was different. She recounted burning a batch of macarons as if it were a victory, giggled as she called him gray suit guy, and offered him a pastry with child-bright eyes. And he, for some reason, had taken a bite. Butter melted on his tongue, lightly sweet, fragrant, with a delicate hint of orange zest. He'd said, "Not bad." But the truth was, it tasted better than any dessert he'd tried in 5-star restaurants. Julian didn't like sweets. He didn't like things that disrupted the neat order of his life. And yet, here he was, his hand unconsciously picking up the scrap of parchment paper that had wrapped the croissant, folding it and slipping it into his suit pocket. As if it were a keepsake worth saving, he stood, paid for the untouched espresso, and left the cafe. As he stepped onto the street, the cool August air brushed his skin, and Julian realized the corner of his mouth had lifted. A smile, not the social kind he used in meetings, but something natural and rare enough to startle even him. Who was that girl, anyway, he wondered, but no answer came. Only the scent of butter and honey lingered somewhere in his memory. Back at Pierce Ventures, Julian walked into his familiar space, where everything was arranged with precision. Today, though, the expansive room felt a little empty. He sat in the leather chair, opened his laptop to review financial reports, but his eyes drifted toward the window. The image of Amelia, with messy hair and a flower-streaked t-shirt, kept circling in his mind. He shook his head, trying to chase it away, but failed. A soft knock sounded. Victor Stone, Julian's longtime advisor, and a man who was almost a second father to him, stepped inside. In his 60s, Stone had a head of silver hair, keen eyes, and a smile that always carried a trace of mischief. He wore a light brown suit, a clear contrast to Julian's rigid style, as if to remind him that life wasn't only about work. "How was the date, son?" Stone asked, taking the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Did the girl make you forget Excel for a few minutes?" Julian frowned, though the corner of his mouth twitched. "Nothing noteworthy," he said evenly. "She wasn't even the person I was supposed to meet. She came in place of her friend." Stone raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "In place of her? Interesting. Tell me." Julian hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing personal matters, not even with Stone, but something in the older man's curious look made the words slip out. "She's a pastry chef. Name's Amelia. She showed up in a flower-stained uniform, hugging a croissant, and talked like we'd known each other forever. She's strange. Strange in a good way or a bad way?" Stone asked, his smile widening. Julian shrugged, trying to sound indifferent. "She brought a pastry to the date and made me try it. Said something like, 'baked with kindness.'" "Who says that?" He stopped, realizing he'd already said more than he intended. "Anyway, it's over. I don't plan to see her again." Stone chuckled, his warm laugh filling the quiet office. "You ate that pastry, didn't you?" Julian stiffened, his hand moving to his breast pocket, where the parchment scrap still rested. "No," he said unconvincingly. "Oh, Julian," Stone said, standing to give his shoulder a light pat. "You can fool a board of directors, but not me. The girl made you smile. I can see it in your eyes. Don't be so quick to shut that door." Julian didn't answer, only watched Stone leave. When the door clicked shut, he took out the parchment, opened it, and caught a faint buttery scent. He folded it again, tucked it into a desk drawer, and told himself he'd throw it out later, but he knew he wouldn't. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Amelia flopped onto the sofa, and Muffin the cat promptly jumped up to curl on her belly. She stared at the ceiling, thinking back on the date. Julian Pierce, with his immaculate gray suit and eyes that seemed to see through everything, wasn't exactly the kind of person she'd expected to meet. He was taciturn, serious, and probably would never read her blog. But there was a moment when he bit into the croissant, and his eyes lit up, when she thought she saw a different Julian. Not a CEO, just an ordinary man who might laugh if she tried hard enough. She didn't know that, across town, Julian was thinking about her too, with a scrap of parchment in his drawer and a strange feeling quietly working its way into his heart. A week had passed since the strange date at the Daily Brew, and Julian Pierce had tried, really tried, to forget the girl with messy hair and the buttery croissant, but the scrap of parchment paper still sat in his desk drawer, never thrown away, like a lingering reminder of a moment he couldn't explain. He had returned to his usual routine, endless meetings, thick financial reports, and quiet evenings in his 12th floor apartment, where everything was so neat it bordered on lifeless. Still, every now and then, with a sip of black coffee, he found himself thinking of the buttery taste and the dimpled smile of Amelia Bennett. Meanwhile, completely unaware that she'd left a mark on the mind of a CEO, Amelia was busy with a big change. Thanks to Sophie's referral, she had just moved into an apartment at Silver Heights with a surprisingly discounted rent, a rare opportunity she couldn't pass up. Apartment 1103, smaller than most in the building, but flooded with sunlight and perfect for her. Muffin the cat. In the little kitchen she had transformed into her personal baking lab. She spent the week unpacking, writing a new blog post about her passion fruit tart recipe, and giggling every time she remembered Gray Suit Guy and the way his eyes lit up when he tasted her croissant. She didn't expect to see him again, but the memory of that date still made her smile, like a funny story to tell friends. On Saturday night, as the clock neared 11:45 p.m., Amelia stood in the kitchen, wearing an oversized flour-dusted t-shirt, holding a hand mixer. She was testing a new custard cream recipe for cream puffs, determined to perfect it before posting to Miss Baker. The steady hum of the mixer blended with soft jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker. Muffin the cat, curled up on the sofa, occasionally shot her a disgruntled look, as if complaining about the noise. What Amelia didn't realize was that, in a building known for its top-tier soundproofing, the buzz of her mixer was leaking up through the ceiling, straight into the apartment on the 12th floor. Julian, freshly returned from a company party, was trying to unwind in his living room with a glass of whiskey and a book on investment strategy. He ditched the suit jacket and rolled up his white shirt sleeves, but his mind remained tense as ever. The faint whir from downstairs began quiet at first, but enough to make him frown. At first, he tried to ignore it, assuming it was someone's washing machine, but after 10 minutes, when the noise kept going, he put down the book, stood up, and sighed. Who on earth made that kind of racket at this hour? Barefoot, he took the elevator down and stopped in front of apartment 1103. The small nameplate outside read A. Bennett. Julian knocked firmly but not aggressively, loud enough to be heard over the mixer inside. The buzzing stopped. Footsteps shuffled behind the door, followed by a voice. "Who is it? Do you know what time it is?" Julian responded, his voice low but tinged with irritation. He didn't mean to be harsh, but he needed sleep, and the noise wasn't helping. The door opened, and Julian froze. Standing in front of him was Amelia Bennett, her hair even messier than last time, a smudge of custard cream on her cheek, and holding a whisk like a weapon. She wore an oversized t-shirt and shorts, her bare legs dusted with flour. Behind her, the apartment was bathed in warm light and the rich scent of butter and vanilla, so comforting that Julian momentarily forgot why he was there. "Gray suit guy," Amelia blurted, eyes wide, then immediately covered her mouth, like she'd said something inappropriate. "I mean, Julian, right? What are you doing here?" Julian blinked, trying to make sense of the situation. "I live upstairs," he said slowly. "Your mixer?" "It's a little loud." Amelia's face flushed pink. She set the whisk down on the table. "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was that loud. I was making custard for cream puffs," and she stopped herself, realizing she was rambling. "Would you like to come in? I can offer you a pastry as an apology." Julian frowned, ready to decline. He wasn't used to accepting invitations from strangers, especially not at midnight, and especially not from a girl who looked like she'd rolled in flour. But Amelia's smile, bright, sincere, slightly awkward, made him hesitate. "That's not necessary," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Come on, just one," Amelia insisted, opening the door wider. "If you don't eat something, I'll feel guilty all night. Muffin will judge me, too." She gestured toward the cat, yawning lazily on the sofa, as if it were an official witness. Julian sighed but stepped inside, intending only to stand at the door. Amelia's apartment was a complete contrast to his own minimalist home. Cookbooks piled on the table, spice jars scattered across the counter, and a small whiteboard scribbled with handwritten recipes. The smell of pastries and vanilla filled the air, making his shoulders relax without him realizing it. Amelia bustled about, grabbing a freshly baked cream puff from the tray, placing it on a plate, and offering it to him. "Here, just made it. Still warm." Julian looked at the pastry golden crust, custard oozing slightly as she gently sliced it open. He hadn't planned to eat it, but her expectant expression, so much like when she'd offered the croissant, made it impossible to refuse. "I don't eat sweets," he said, even as he took the plate. "Just one bite," Amelia urged, grinning. "If you hate it, I'll never make noise again. Promise." Julian took a small bite, ready to say something neutral, but the smooth custard, lightly sweet, blended perfectly with the crisp shell, and he paused. He said nothing, just nodded slightly, and Amelia beamed, like she'd just won a prize. Before handing back the plate, Julian casually grabbed one more puff, then left without another word. Sunday morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of Julian Pierce's 12th floor apartment, casting soft shadows on the dark wood dining table, where he was reading the financial section after being woken up the night before by Amelia Bennett's stand mixer. Julian had told himself he would keep his distance from the strange girl downstairs, but the cream puff she'd handed him, now long gone, had made that promise difficult to keep. He didn't like sweets, and yet the smooth custard and crisp shell had vanished from the plate without a second thought. And, though he refused to admit it aloud, he still remembered the bashful smile she gave him when offering that pastry down on the 11th floor. Amelia woke up with a twinge of guilt. That mixer had definitely disturbed Gray Suit Guy, now known to her as Julian, the upstairs neighbor. Determined to apologize properly, she set out to bake a batch of savory scones using a test recipe: cheese and thyme. Muffin the cat stretched lazily on the kitchen counter, eyeing the tray of scones with a look of deep suspicion, as if already anticipating disappointment. "Don't judge me," Amelia muttered, giving him a pat on the head before packing a few slightly wonky but fragrant scones into a paper box and heading for the elevator. Julian was sipping his black coffee when a knock sounded at the door. He frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone this early on a weekend. When he opened it, there stood Amelia in her now signature style. An oversized t-shirt dusted with flour, her hair messily pinned up, and a pastry box in her hands. Her smile, bright yet a little sheepish, made him pause longer than he meant to. "Hi, Julian," Amelia said, her voice a touch nervous. "I brought you some scones to say sorry for the noise last night. I wasn't sure if you like savory stuff, so I made cheese and thyme. Hope they're okay." Julian glanced at the box, then back at her. He meant to say no. He didn't like unexpected visitors, especially ones bearing things that might throw off the rhythm of his day. But her hopeful eyes, combined with the warm, herby aroma wafting from the box, made him reconsider. "You didn't have to do that," he said, but still stepped aside. "Come in." Amelia stepped into the apartment and was instantly hit by how different it was from hers. It looked like something out of an interior design magazine. Sleek, minimalist, with black leather furniture, a glass table, and not a single item out of place. Compared to her own chaotic little home, crammed with cookbooks and spice jars, this place felt like another planet. She set the pastry box on the dining table and lifted the lid, revealing golden scones, uneven in shape, but mouth-watering in smell. "They're not much to look at," she admitted, scratching her head. "Experimental recipe, so be honest if they're awful." Julian sat down, picked up a scone, and took a bite. The cheesy flavor mixed nicely with the thyme, though the texture was slightly dry, like she'd overmixed the dough. He frowned slightly, chewing thoughtfully, then said, "Terrible, but strangely, I want more." His voice was low and even, but something about the tone hinted at a playful tease. Amelia burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the quiet apartment. "Seriously? Terrible, but still worth eating? You're a strange one." She sat down across from him without waiting for an invitation and launched into a story about her first scone experiment a few weeks ago, when she'd accidentally used salt instead of sugar. "Muffin looked at that tray of disaster like it was garbage," she said, eyes twinkling. "He's the harshest food critic I know." Julian, not usually one to smile, felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Your cat critiques your baking?" he asked, voice tinged with disbelief and curiosity. "Oh, totally. Muffin is the pickiest eater. One time, I made butter cookies, and he sniffed them once and walked away, like, 'You think I'm going to eat this?'" She mimicked the cat's glare, eyes wide, and Julian let out an unexpected laugh, a short, deep sound that caught them both off guard. He quickly stopped, as though he'd done something out of character. Amelia, sensing his awkwardness, quickly changed the subject. "So, what about you? Any hobbies besides reading financial news and wearing gray suits?" Julian raised an eyebrow, not used to being asked things so directly. "I don't have time for hobbies," he replied. But then, drawn in by her smile, added, "But I do run early mornings, when the city's still quiet." "Running?" Amelia tilted her head, eyes lighting up. "I like running too, but the slow kind. The kind where you stop to admire trees or grab a coffee midway. Probably not your style, huh?" "Definitely not," Julian said, though his lips curved upward slightly. "You stop for coffee during a run?" "Of course. Life's short. Got to enjoy it." She laughed again, tossing her hands in the air and sending scone crumbs onto the table. "Oh, sorry." Julian shook his head, waving it off. "It's fine." They sat there, trading light conversation. Amelia shared her love for baking, the latest post on Miss Baker that she'd written at 2 a.m., and how she found joy in baking even when Muffin was her only audience. Julian, though still reserved, began to open up in small ways. How he liked listening to classical music while working, or that one time he tried to cook and burned an entire pot of soup. "I'm not meant to be in the kitchen," he said dryly, though his eyes had warmed. Amelia realized he wasn't as cold as he seemed. Beneath the suit and stern gaze was someone who could smile, could listen, and could eat a bad scone and still reach for another. Julian, meanwhile, found himself strangely at ease. His apartment, usually just a place to sleep, now smelled like thyme and laughter. When Amelia stood to leave, she left the box of scones on the table. "Keep them," she said with a bright grin. "If you hate them, just blame Muffin. He's the real mastermind." Julian nodded, walking her to the door. "Thanks," he said. And this time, his voice held a sincerity that surprised even him. As the door closed behind her, he looked at the box, picked up another scone, and took a bite. Still dry, but he smiled. Downstairs, Amelia stepped back into her kitchen, petted Muffin on the head, and thought of Julian's rare smile. "This neighbor is kind of interesting," she murmured, heart beating a little faster. Amelia Bennett never imagined that a short blog post, written hastily at 1 a.m., could cause such a mess. Her latest post on Miss Baker recounted her attempt at baking cheese scones to apologize to her neighbor, along with a quick photo. The back of a man in a white shirt seated at a table with a misshapen scone in front of him. Her caption, teasing in tone, read, "When you bring apology scones to your neighbor. But this VIP eats like he's chewing lemons. Next time, more butter." She hadn't mentioned his name or shown his face, and figured only her usual few dozen loyal readers would even see it. But by Monday morning, when she woke up, her phone was flooded with notifications. The blog had gone viral on foodie forums and social media. People were buzzing about the mysterious VIP in the photo. Someone recognized the luxurious apartment in the background. Someone else zoomed in on a pen lying on the table and spotted a tiny Pierce Ventures logo. Within hours, the rumor spread. Miss Baker is dating Julian Pierce, CEO of Pierce Ventures. Some readers even dug through her old posts, analyzing every word for clues. Amelia nearly spat out her coffee while reading the comments. "Dating with gray suit guy? Oh my God," she groaned, slapping her forehead. Muffin, sprawled next to her on the couch, gave her a look that clearly said, "You brought this on yourself." Meanwhile, on the 42nd floor of Pierce Ventures, Julian Pierce was facing an unwanted storm. His assistant, looking pale, handed him a printed article titled, "The Cold CEO and His Sweet Secret, Dating the Pastry Blogger." Julian scanned the headline and frowned. The photo, though blurry, was unmistakably him, and the caption, "Eats like he's chewing lemons," made him huff, but also caused the corner of his mouth to twitch slightly. He wasn't angry. In fact, oddly enough, he found it amusing. Victor Stone, his longtime advisor, walked in, wearing a mischievous grin. "You're famous now, Julian," he said, setting a cup of coffee on the desk. "That pastry girl really knows how to stir things up." "Nothing worth stirring," Julian replied evenly, eyes still fixed on the article. "Just a misunderstanding. I'll take care of it." Gently, Stone warned with a wink. "She didn't do it on purpose, and you don't seem all that bothered." Julian didn't answer. Instead, he motioned for his assistant to contact Amelia. He needed to see her not just to squash the rumors, but because, though he'd never admit it, he was curious to hear her explanation and maybe see that familiar sheepish smile again. That afternoon, Amelia stood nervously in front of the Pierce Ventures tower, clutching a box of butter cookies like a peace offering. Wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled into a ponytail. She had tried to look a little more put together than usual, but hadn't noticed the small streak of flour still clinging to her cheek. The elevator whooshed her up to the 42nd floor, and when she stepped into Julian's office, it felt like she'd walked straight into a movie set. The room was massive, lined with glass windows overlooking the city skyline, and Julian, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, sat behind a sleek desk, like some kind of modern-day king, but his eyes, when they landed on her, held something unexpectedly playful. "Miss Bennett," Julian said, voice low as he gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please have a seat." Amelia sat down, placing the cookie box on the desk, hands fidgeting. "I'm really sorry about the blog post," she began, voice shaky. "I didn't think it would blow up like that. I didn't name you, I swear. Just a blurry back photo. And I didn't call you a VIP. People made that up." Julian raised an eyebrow, picking up a printed copy of the blog. "Eats like he's chewing lemons," he read aloud, a trace of amusement in his voice. "That's how you describe me?" Amelia blushed and covered her mouth. No, I just meant you were so serious. It looked like you hated the scone. But you did eat the whole thing, didn't you?" She tilted her head, eyes wide, as if that fact alone could clear her name. Julian huffed, but the corner of his lips curved upward. "You took my photo without permission," he said, though his tone wasn't scolding. "And now the whole city thinks I'm dating Miss Baker." Amelia groaned, hiding her face in her hands. "Oh God, I knew that name was silly. I'll delete the post, I swear. And this," she pushed the cookie box toward him, "is an apology. No experiments this time. Real butter cookies. I promise they're good." Julian glanced at the box, then back at her. He hadn't intended to smile. But her flustered panic, the way she gestured wildly and accidentally knocked a crumb onto the desk, made him do it anyway. "You apologize with pastries a lot," he said, his voice softer now. "Last time it was cream puffs, now cookies. Well, pastry is kind of my love language," Amelia said with a sheepish grin. "If you don't like cookies, I could make soup, pasta." "Wait, what do you like?" Julian shook his head and opened the box, pulling out a cookie. He took a bite, rich, buttery, and just sweet enough, and nodded. "Not bad," he said, but his eyes, gleaming like they did when he first tasted her croissant, told a different story. "See, told you," Amelia said proudly. "So, what do you want me to do about the rumor? I can write a correction post, something like, 'Not dating, just neighbors.'" Julian sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "No need," he said. "My PR team will handle it. But next time, Miss Bennett, no sneaky photos." Amelia nodded quickly, then paused, biting her lip. "You're really not mad?" she asked. "Because I saw you smile." Julian stiffened, like a man caught in the act. "I didn't smile," he replied. But his tone lacked conviction. Amelia beamed, dimples popping, and he knew there was no point pretending anymore. Meanwhile, back at Sweet Haven, the pastry shop's assistant Lucas accidentally poured fuel on the fire. After reading Amelia's viral post, he casually told his coworkers about that tall guy in a suit who had once picked up the wrong order at the shop. The story made its way to a regular customer, then online, where someone tweeted, "Rumor has it CEO, Pierce visits Sweet Haven often. Is he really dating Miss Baker?" When Lucas saw the chaos he'd sparked, he just shrugged and said, "How was I supposed to know the guy was that famous?" Back in the office, Julian walked Amelia to the elevator, his eyes following her as she stepped in. "Miss Bennett," he called, just before the doors closed. The cookies were better than the scones. Amelia turned with a bright smile. "Thanks, Mr. Pierce. Next time, I'll bring croissants. Just be ready with compliments." She waved as the elevator doors slid shut, leaving Julian with one of his rare, real smiles. Back at his desk, the box of cookies still sat there. He picked up another one, took a bite, and thought of the girl who was quietly turning his world upside down. Downstairs, Amelia returned to the bakery, humming as she kneaded dough, still giggling to herself. She wasn't sure if Julian had truly forgiven her or if he just liked the cookies, but either way, she definitely wasn't done baking for him yet. Amelia Bennett stood behind the counter at Sweet Haven Bakery, kneading dough for a new batch of bread, though her mind drifted elsewhere. Still stuck on the meeting at Julian Pierce's office the day before, she couldn't believe she'd unintentionally caused a citywide dating rumor. And even less that Julian stoic, ice-cold Julian had actually smiled after tasting her butter cookies. "Not bad," he had said, but his eyes had sparkled, just like they did when he tasted her croissant. Maybe he didn't hate her after all. Amelia smiled to herself, scattering flour on her shirt, which Lucas, the shop assistant, immediately noticed. "Amy, are you daydreaming again? Thinking about Mr. Tall, Dark, and CEO?" Lucas teased, carrying out a tray of freshly baked lemon tarts. The curly-haired, cheeky assistant had already apologized a dozen times for unintentionally fueling the dating rumors. But that didn't stop him from poking fun at every opportunity. "Shut it, Lucas," Amelia warned, though a smile tugged at her lips. "I'm just thinking about a new recipe." Lucas laughed, about to make another joke, when the shop bell rang. Amelia looked up, and her heart skipped a beat. Julian Pierce, in a sharply tailored black suit, stepped into the cozy little bakery, looking utterly out of place among chalkboard signs advertising butter cookies buy 5 to get 1 free. And the scent of cinnamon sugar in the air. The customers, mostly neighborhood moms and a few high schoolers, turned to stare and whisper. "Hi, Julian," Amelia said, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to steady her voice. "Are you here to buy something?" Julian nodded, his eyes scanning the pastry display. "All of it," he said, calm and firm. "I'd like to buy everything in the shop today." Amelia blinked, convinced she'd misheard. Lucas nearly dropped his tray. "Everything?" he repeated, voice rising an octave. You mean the bread, the cakes, the tarts, the cookies, everything? Everything. Julian looked at Lucas, then back at Amelia. Yes. Pack it all up, please. Amelia froze, her brain struggling to process. Sweet Haven wasn't a huge bakery, but she had at least 10 trays of assorted goods out today. Enough for a full day of sales. You're serious? She asked, fiddling with the edge of her apron. Why would you buy everything? Julian gave a small shrug, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Consider it compensation. Restoring your shop's reputation, he said, voice calm but with a subtle awkwardness. That rumor last week couldn't have helped. Amelia blushed, flustered, and oddly touched. She hadn't expected Julian, Mr. Spreadsheet himself, to care about something so personal. You didn't have to do that, she murmured. He already apologized. I know, Julian replied, his gaze lingering on her longer than necessary. But I wanted to. Lucas couldn't handle the silence any longer. Amy, take the win. He grinned. This sale's worth a whole month's rent. He started boxing up pastries like a man on a mission, muttering, Big CEO energy, I respect it. Amelia rolled her eyes at him but turned back to Julian with a sincere smile. Thank you, she said gently. Really? But next time, just buy one cookie. You scared me half to death. Julian let out a quiet huff, but the corner of his mouth tugged upward, clearly softened by her grin. I'll consider it, he said, accepting the massive receipt from Lucas, who was valiantly trying to suppress laughter at the eye-popping total. Later that afternoon, back at Pierce Ventures, Julian sat behind his desk, surrounded by dozens of pastry boxes from Sweet Haven. Around him, staff from secretaries to interns were buzzing with excitement, each holding a tart or cookie, whispering about their boss and the baker girl. Julian, who generally avoided attention like the plague, simply sipped his coffee, occasionally glancing at the box of butter cookies he'd kept aside on his desk, just for himself. A ringtone broke the calm. The screen lit up. Grandma Eleanor, he answered, switching to video, and there she was, Eleanor Pierce, elegant as ever, with her silver hair swept into a neat bun and a warm, mischievous smile. At 70-some, she still exuded grace, but her twinkling eyes always hinted at mischief. Julian, working late again, she said with mild scolding in her voice. I told you to take a break, not bring the entire bakery back to the office. Julian frowned, but his tone softened. I didn't bring the entire bakery, just some treats for the staff. Eleanor chuckled, but her eyes narrowed, as if spotting something in the background. Who's that behind you? Julian turned, and his heart gave a little jolt. Amelia had appeared at his office door, unnoticed until now, holding a small tray of extra bread, likely meant to complete the order. Wearing a white t-shirt and a loose apron, her ponytail slightly undone with soft strands falling over her shoulders. She gave an awkward wave as she noticed the screen. Sorry, just bringing more bread. Didn't mean to interrupt. Eleanor smiled. One of those knowing, layered smiles that made Julian's skin crawl with anticipation. She's lovely, she said warmly. Are you the one baking for my grandson now? Amelia blushed, stepping closer to the screen. Hi, I'm Amelia. I work at Sweet Haven. Julian, he bought everything we baked today, so I thought I'd bring a little extra. Very generous, Eleanor said, shooting Julian a glance full of meaning. I like her. Julian, you should invite this one to dinner sometime. Grandma, Julian said, a warning tone creeping in, but Eleanor just laughed and ended the call before he could argue. Amelia, standing by the desk, covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Your grandmother is adorable, she said as she set the tray down. What was that look she gave you at the end? Julian shook his head, trying to stay composed. She imagines things, he said curtly. But when he looked at Amelia, his eyes softened. You didn't need to bring more. We already had plenty, but you bought everything. I had to return the favor somehow, Amelia replied, nudging the tray forward. These are olive rolls. New recipe. I promise no lemon face this time. Julian picked up a slice, took a bite. The briny olives and crispy crust made his brows lift slightly. Very good, he said. But his voice was warmer now, enough to make Amelia smile back. As she left the office, Julian watched her go, still holding the roll, and back at Sweet Haven, Amelia returned to her station, kneading dough again, thinking about the glint in Julian's eyes and his grandmother's conspiratorial grin. She didn't know it yet, but a small seed, subtle, uncertain, was quietly beginning to grow in both their hearts. A week had passed since Julian bought out the entire Sweet Haven bakery, an act that had left Amelia both overwhelmed and deeply moved. But what truly surprised her was the email he sent afterward, proposing a charity baking class for underprivileged children, with her as the co-instructor and Pierce Ventures as the sponsor. Good for community relations, he had written, but Amelia suspected there was more behind it. Now, seeing him in a navy sweater and slacks no suit, for once she couldn't help but grin. He looked completely out of place amidst the colorful chaos of flour, aprons, and hyper children. But he stood there with arms crossed, watching the room with a steady gaze. "Ready, Mr. Pierce?" Amelia teased, nudging him gently with her elbow. "These kids are tougher than your boardroom." Julian raised a brow, lips curving slightly. "I can handle it," he replied. But his gaze lingered on her, catching the spark of excitement in her eyes. Before he could say more, the event coordinator clapped her hands, signaling the start of the class. Amelia took the lead, her voice warm and animated as she explained how to make simple sugar cookies. The children, ranging from 6 to 10 years old, listened with varying degrees of focus, some already elbow-deep in flour. Julian assisted, distributing measuring spoons and mediating arguments about who got the bigger mixing bowl. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, but Amelia noticed the way his shoulders relaxed each time the kids burst into laughter. Among the group was Olivia, a spirited 7-year-old with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, who had proudly declared herself the best baker here right from the start. Her apron was already streaked with butter and flour, but her enthusiasm was contagious. "Miss Amy, can I make heart-shaped cookies?" she asked, bouncing in place. "For my mom, she loves hearts." "Of course, Olivia," Amelia said, kneeling to meet the girl's eye level. "We'll do whatever you want, right, Julian?" Caught off guard, Julian gave a small nod. "Hearts? Sure." His voice was calm, but Amelia caught a flicker of amusement in his eyes. As the class continued, something unexpected happened. Julian and Amelia slipped into an effortless rhythm. She demonstrated how to knead the dough with her flour-dusted hands, while he explained measurements with the precision of a CEO discussing profit margins. When a boy spilled sugar all over the counter, Amelia simply laughed. Julian, to her surprise, handed the child a towel without a hint of irritation. They balanced each other well, and the children flourished under their shared guidance. Olivia, however, was the star of the show. Standing proudly between Amelia and Julian, she directed like a tiny orchestra conductor. "Uncle Jay, roll the dough." "Miss Amy, cut the hearts," she commanded, hands on hips. Julian obeyed, his large hands awkward but gentle as he wielded the rolling pin. When Olivia fumbled with the cookie cutter, he knelt beside her, carefully guiding her hand. "Like this," he said softly, voice low and unexpectedly tender. Slow and steady, he coached, helping her create a lopsided heart-shaped cookie. Olivia beamed and held it up like a trophy. "Perfect. You're amazing, Uncle Jay. You and Miss Amy should totally get married, like in those princess cartoons." The room burst into laughter, and Julian turned red, a color Amelia had never seen on him. She bit her lip to hold in a giggle, her eyes twinkling. "Olivia, you have such creative ideas," she said, ruffling the girl's hair. Julian cleared his throat and stood up quickly. "Let's focus on the cookies," he muttered. But Olivia wasn't deterred. She whispered loudly to her friend, "They look exactly like a prince and princess." Amelia glanced at Julian, half expecting him to scowl, but instead he gave her a rare, soft smile. She smiled back, and for a moment the noise in the room faded, and it felt like just the two of them, connected by a child's innocent fantasy. Midway through the session, Victor Stone arrived, his silver hair glinting under the lights as he leaned against the doorframe, observing quietly. He had been the one who nudged Julian to participate, sensing it would be good for him. Seeing Julian help a boy sprinkle sugar onto cookies, Stone's eyes narrowed in satisfaction. He caught Amelia's eye and gave her a subtle nod. "You're good for him," it seemed to say. The first class ended in joyful chaos, frosting-covered cheeks, rainbow sprinkles everywhere, like confetti. Olivia proudly presented a tray of heart-shaped cookies, one of which was for Uncle Jay and Miss Amy to share. Julian hesitated, but under Olivia's wide-eyed gaze, he broke the cookie in half and offered one piece to Amelia. "A team effort," he said, voice low but warm. Amelia accepted the cookie, her fingers brushing his, sending a flutter through her chest. "Thanks, teammate," she said with a small smile. The cookie was too sweet and slightly burnt, but she nibbled it anyway, Watching as Julian carefully took a bite of his half, Olivia clapped, delighted. See, just like in the movies, she cheered, prompting the rest of the kids to giggle. As the class wrapped up, parents arrived to pick up their children, each walking away with a bag of imperfect cookies and bright memories. Olivia hugged Amelia tight, then unexpectedly ran to Julian and wrapped her arms around his leg. "You'll come back, right, Uncle Jay?" she asked. Eyes round and sincere, Julian froze, unaccustomed to such affection, but gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe," he said, voice softer than usual. Amelia watched, her heart warming. Julian, once all hard lines and tailored suits, was letting a 7-year-old chip away at his armor. He met her gaze, and for a brief second, looked away, unable to hide the vulnerability in his eyes. After the children left, Amelia and Julian stayed behind to clean up, stacking bowls and wiping down tables. Victor approached with a warm smile. "Well done, both of you," he said, patting Julian on the back. "You make a good team." He winked at Amelia before leaving, his words lingering in the air. Now alone, Amelia nudged Julian with her elbow. "You were amazing with Olivia," she said sincerely. "I didn't think you could be so gentle with kids." "I'm not gentle," Julian replied, but his voice lacked conviction. She was persistent. "Just admit it." "You liked her," Amelia teased, tossing a towel at him. He caught it. The rare smile. Returning. "Maybe," he said, echoing his earlier words to Olivia. "You're good with them. They shine around you." Amelia blushed, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks. It's easy when they're as sweet as Olivia. And thanks for doing this. It really meant a lot." Julian nodded, his gaze steady. It was worth doing. And though he said no more, Amelia could feel the weight in his words. As they parted ways, Amelia carried home one leftover cookie, thinking of Olivia's laughter and Julian's quiet kindness. Later that night, Julian found a heart-shaped cookie in the pocket of his jacket, one Olivia had secretly tucked in. He placed it on his desk and smiled softly, realizing that Amelia Bennett was slowly becoming an indispensable part of his world. The community center was once again bustling the following Saturday morning. As the charity baking class entered its second week, tables were covered in flour, sugar, and cookie cutters. Children giggled as they tied their aprons, and the scent of butter wafted through the air. Amelia Bennett, in her flour-smudged apron and white t-shirt, was cheerfully instructing a group of kids on how to make peanut butter cookies, but her eyes occasionally drifted to Julian Pierce, who stood calmly in the corner of the room, sleeves rolled up, helping the children with his usual composed focus. Since last week, when little Olivia called them a bride and groom, Amelia had felt a new closeness to Julian. Though he still maintained his reserved demeanor, something had subtly shifted. She tried to keep her attention on the kids, especially Olivia, the bright-eyed 7-year-old currently struggling to knead dough with her tiny hands. But the air changed the moment she walked in. A woman tall, blonde curls, perfectly styled, wearing a fitted sapphire blue dress entered the hall, heels tapping rhythmically against the tile. Confident, poised, and unmistakably sharp, her presence turned heads. Amelia recognized her instantly. Lauren Hayes, Julian's ex-girlfriend and former business partner. She'd seen Lauren's name while researching Pierce Ventures after the dating rumor went viral. Her heart dipped slightly, unsure why. Lauren strolled in, drawing stares from parents and volunteers alike. Her polite smile didn't reach her eyes as they briefly passed over Amelia, glinting with icy disinterest. "Julian," she called, her voice smooth but cutting. "I heard you were hosting this event, so I thought I'd stop by." "What a surprise." Julian turned, his expression tightening for just a second before returning to neutral. "Lauren," he said evenly, "didn't expect you here." Amelia, standing beside Olivia, focused intently on helping her roll out dough, but she couldn't help hearing Lauren continue, her tone loud enough to carry. "I was just curious. You usually don't spend your time on things like this, a baking class with children." She laughed softly, her voice carrying a sharp edge that made Amelia's shoulders tense. Julian's brow furrowed as he stepped closer. "It's a company-sponsored community initiative," he said coolly. "Is there something you needed?" Lauren gave a casual shrug, her eyes flicking to Amelia before lingering with veiled judgment. "I just heard the Baker girl was getting a lot of attention." "Miss Baker, right? How cute." The word cute was said with such pointed condescension that Amelia gripped the rolling pin tighter. Olivia, oblivious to the tension, piped up. "Miss Amy is the best teacher. She makes the yummiest cookies ever." She beamed, but Lauren offered only a hollow smile. "Adorable," she murmured, then turned back to Julian. But you, Julian, you belong in boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, not in a bakery." Her voice dropped, still audible to Amelia, who was now at the back table, fetching more flour. "She's not in your league. You know that. Fun is fine, but this isn't your world." Amelia froze, hand trembling as she poured flour into a mixing bowl. The words struck like daggers, slicing through the quiet insecurity she kept buried beneath cheerful smiles. She was just a baker, living in a tiny apartment, writing an anonymous blog. Julian was a CEO, the kind of man who belonged to glass towers and Forbes covers. She turned away quickly, blinking back tears. She didn't want anyone to see, especially not him. Julian, having clearly heard Lauren's words, clenched his jaw. "That's enough, Lauren," he said, voice low and sharp. "You don't need to comment on her or this project." He glanced toward Amelia. She was hunched over, shoulders slightly shaking. He wanted to go to her, to say something, but Lauren, either unaware or uncaring, continued. "I'm just being honest," she said, her tone feigning concern. "You have bigger responsibilities. Don't let a passing hobby distract you." Julian opened his mouth to reply, but it was Olivia who broke the tension. Still beside Amelia, she tugged gently at her apron. "Miss Amy, are you okay? You look sad." Her voice cut through the room. Amelia quickly forced a smile, patting Olivia's head. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just got flour in my eye," she said softly. She glanced at Julian. He was looking at her, but she couldn't read his expression. And in that silence, her heart ached. She assumed his silence meant agreement, and that hurt more than Lauren's words. The rest of the class passed under a heavy cloud. Amelia kept smiling for the kids, helping them bag cookies to take home. But her mind was spinning out. Julian continued to assist, quiet, distant. Lauren had left early, but her presence lingered, like perfume that refused to fade. As the kids trickled out with their parents, Olivia hugged Amelia tightly and whispered, "You're the best teacher ever. Don't let that mean lady make you sad." Amelia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Olivia," she whispered, hugging her a little tighter. After cleanup, Julian approached, concern shadowing his features. "Miss Bennett," he began, voice low, "about what happened earlier. It's fine." Amelia cut in, her voice gentle but firm. "I understand. Thank you for today." She turned before he could respond, unwilling to let him see the tears threatening to spill. She left the center quickly, heart heavy and aching. Back in her apartment on the 11th floor, Amelia collapsed onto the couch. Muffin the cat immediately jumped onto her stomach and curled up, like a warm loaf. She stared at the ceiling, Lauren's words looping in her head. "Not in your league." She'd always known she and Julian came from different worlds, but hearing it spoken aloud in that tone, from someone like her, made Amelia feel small. She thought about Julian's expression, about his silence, and she couldn't help wondering, was she really just a temporary distraction? Meanwhile, on the 12th floor, Julian stood by his window, looking out at the city skyline. His phone was in his hand, thumb hovering over Amelia's number. He wanted to call her, but he didn't know what to say. Lauren's words had angered him, but it was Amelia's hurt expression that haunted him. He had wanted to protect her, but as always, his silence had only made it worse. On the table beside him sat the heart-shaped cookie Olivia had given him the week before. He picked it up gently, staring at it, as if it held the answers, and he thought about Amelia's smile, now dimmed by a sadness he had failed to stop. At her desk, Amelia opened her laptop and placed her fingers on the keyboard, hoping to write a new blog post. But they didn't move. She didn't know if she could keep doing the class or face Julian again, when her sense of self-worth had just been so deeply shaken. Amelia Bennett's apartment on the 11th floor was filled with the scent of vanilla, but the atmosphere was heavy. She sat on the sofa with Muffin curled up beside her, eyes fixed on the window. Lauren Hayes's words from the charity baking class still echoed in her mind. "She's not in your league." Those cutting words, paired with Julian Pierce's silence, had left Amelia feeling small and foolish. She'd stayed up all night baking to chase away the ache, ending up with a half-and-half cookie, half-sweet chocolate, half-savory cheese. She packed it carefully in a box and slipped in a note. "Some things can't be whole if only one person is trying." Then she asked Lucas to deliver it upstairs to the 12th floor. At Sweet Haven, Amelia tried to keep working, but every motion was sluggish. Lucas, with his signature curls and mischievous grin, noticed something was off. "You okay, Amy?" he asked, holding a tray of tarts. "Just tired," Amelia replied, her voice soft, but her eyes were rimmed with red. She didn't want to worry him, but inside, She was unraveling. That afternoon, Amelia went to the community center to deliver the news. She was stepping away from the class. She hoped to avoid Julian, but knew she had to talk to the kids, especially Olivia. To her relief and slight disappointment, Julian wasn't there. Olivia ran up to her, her pigtails bouncing, and hugged her tightly. "Miss Amy, what cookies are we making today?" she asked. Eyes sparkling, Amelia knelt down, forcing a smile. "I just came to talk today, sweetheart. I might not be teaching anymore." Olivia's eyes widened in dismay. "You're not coming back? But I like you the most, and Mr. J likes you too." Her voice wavered, and Amelia's heart clenched. "I like you too," she whispered, holding the girl tightly. "But I need to take a little break, okay? You'll still bake amazing cookies. I know you will." Olivia nodded slowly, though her face was downcast. "I'll make cookies for you, so you'll come back." She ran off to grab flour, determined to bake her way into keeping Amelia around. Amelia left the center with a heavy heart. Olivia, with her gap-toothed smile, was one of the reasons she loved that class. Julian, though she hated to admit it, was another, but Lauren's words had planted deep doubt in her heart. Back at the bakery, Amelia opened her laptop and stared at the unfinished draft of her Miss Baker blog. She wanted to write about the half-and-half cookie, but every word felt stuck. She thought about Julian, his rare smile with Olivia, the way he'd eaten her cookies, even though he didn't like sweets. Had she misunderstood him? But then Lauren's voice rang out again in her memory, and she quietly shut her laptop. Upstairs on the 12th floor, Julian opened the box Amelia had sent. Inside lay the half-and-half cookie and the note. "Some things can't be whole if only one person is trying." His chest tightened. He didn't know exactly what Lauren had said to her, but he could guess, and his silence, his damn silence, had hurt her. He took a bite of the cookie. The bittersweet chocolate clashed gently with the tangy cheese, an oddly satisfying mix, yet undeniably divided. Just like his feelings, Julian wanted to call her, but apologies didn't come easily to him. He thought of her, of the awkward smiles, the flour-dusted apron, the sparkle in her eyes when she taught. She had made him laugh. She had made him try cookies again. Now she was walking away, and he didn't know how to stop her. Amelia curled up with Muffin, gazing out her window. She thought of Olivia, of the cookie she'd sent Julian. This decision hurt, but she had to protect herself from deeper wounds. She didn't know if Julian understood, or if he even cared. But in her chest, something ached, like an empty pan cooling on a silent stove. On the 12th floor, Julian stood in the kitchen, a space he rarely used. In front of him was a disaster. A misshapen, blackened cookie. The smell of burnt sugar clung to the air, like guilt. Victor Stone had just called him and said, "Don't let silence ruin something worth holding on to." Julian wasn't good with words, so he chose to speak the language Amelia loved most, baking. The result was far worse than he'd hoped. But still, he carefully packed the charred cookie into a box, and with a deep breath, he made up his mind. He was going to see her. At 8 p.m., a knock echoed through Amelia's apartment. She opened the door and froze. There stood Julian, no suit in sight, just a soft blue sweater and jeans, looking human, unsure. In his hands was a small box. "I made this," he said awkwardly, extending it toward her. "I didn't know how to start, so I figured I'd start with a burnt cookie." Amelia looked at the box, then up at him, eyes stinging. She opened the lid slowly. Inside was a jet-black, lopsided cookie. "You made this?" she asked, her voice trembling. She couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. Julian nodded, and for once, the guarded look in his eyes was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "I know baking is your language," he said, "and I tried, clearly. I'm worse at it than you imagined." He paused, drawing in a breath. "Amelia, about last week. I don't agree with anything Lauren said, but I stayed silent, and that silence hurt you. I'm sorry." Amelia bit her lip, and tears spilled over. She never imagined that Julian Pierce, the man who once wouldn't even try her scones, would be standing here with a burnt cookie in hand, apologizing. "You didn't need to bake anything," she whispered, voice catching. "But thank you." Julian took a step closer, hesitating, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to quit," he said, voice low. "The class needs you. Olivia needs you." And he hesitated again, this time longer. "I need you." Amelia let out a soft, tearful laugh and wiped her cheeks. "You're sweeter than your cookie," she teased, but her heart was racing. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Julian, stiff at first, slowly embraced her back, holding her tighter than he realized. From the kitchen counter, Muffin jumped down, padded over to the box, sniffed the cookie, took a bite, and immediately walked away with a look of disdain. They both burst out laughing. "Muffin's not impressed," Amelia giggled. "He has good taste," Julian replied, his eyes warm, focused only on her. In that tiny kitchen, surrounded by the scent of cocoa and burnt sugar, they stood there, holding each other, like two puzzle pieces that finally fit. Amelia knew that, no matter how different their worlds were, this moment was perfect. The Pierce estate sat quietly on the snowy edge of the city, a stately home with red roof tiles and a garden lightly dusted with snow. Inside, the fireplace crackled softly, Christmas lights twinkled on a towering tree, and the scent of pine mingled with fresh-baked gingerbread. Amelia Bennett stepped into the festive warmth, holding a tin of homemade butter cookies. She wore a simple red sweater, her hair loosely tied back, and stood beside Julian Pierce, feeling like she had walked straight into a holiday painting. Julian, in a dark blue sweater and tailored trousers, looked more relaxed than usual, though a hint of tension still lingered in his eyes as he led her inside. After the emotional hug in her kitchen the week before, Julian had invited Amelia to spend Christmas with his family, specifically with his grandmother, Eleanor Pierce. The woman he often spoke of with reverence, Amelia had agreed, her heart pounding with nerves. She wasn't sure if she belonged in his world. But when the front door opened, Eleanor Pierce, with her silver hair pinned up and a warm smile, wrapped Amelia in an enthusiastic hug. "You're Amelia," she exclaimed, her voice delighted. "I've been waiting to meet you since the moment you appeared in our video call." Blushing, Amelia offered the cookie tin. "I brought butter cookies. I wasn't sure if they were Christmassy enough, but—" "They're perfect, dear," Eleanor beamed. "Come, we're baking the Pierce family gingerbread." "Julian, you too." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Grandmother, you know I can't bake," he said, but followed them anyway, his eyes lingering on Amelia with rare softness. The Pierce kitchen was spacious, with marble countertops and a vintage oven. Eleanor pulled out a worn, leather-bound recipe book, its pages yellowed with age. "This is the family secret," she said with a wink, "but I think you'll make it even better." Amelia smiled, the nerves fading. She rolled up her sleeves and began mixing the dough, while Eleanor guided her, slipping in stories of her youth between steps. Julian was tasked with rolling the dough. He worked carefully, albeit clumsily, ending up with flour-coated hands. Amelia laughed. "Mr. Pierce, we're rolling dough, not negotiating million-dollar contracts," she teased. Julian grunted, but the corners of his mouth lifted. "Easy for you to say," he muttered, deliberately rolling the dough unevenly, just to make her laugh. Eleanor watched them, her eyes twinkling with amusement, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. Together, they cut the cookies into stars, trees, and hearts, Amelia's idea, in honor of Olivia. As the gingerbread baked, its warm scent filled the kitchen. Amelia and Julian stood side by side, shoulders gently brushing. She told him about Sweet Haven, about Muffin the cat, and the time she burned an entire tray of cookies as an apprentice. Julian, usually reserved, admitted to once sneaking cookies as a child and getting caught. "Grandmother made me do dishes for a week," he said with a rare, fond smile. Eleanor, piping icing onto the cookies, chimed in. "He was a little rascal back then. Now he's too serious. Thank goodness you came along, Amelia. He laughs more now." She gave Amelia a warm look. "Ever since I saw you on that video call, I knew you were the missing flavor in this family." Amelia's cheeks flushed. Her hands paused over the dough. "You're being too kind," she whispered. But her heart was beating fast. Beside her, Julian said nothing, but the way he looked at her steady, gentle spoke volumes. Christmas dinner took place in a cozy dining room, the table filled with roast dishes, warm rolls, and fresh gingerbread. Amelia sat beside Julian, feeling an unexpected sense of belonging. Eleanor shared stories of old Pierce holidays, of Julian's grandfather, of Christmases long past. Amelia, usually awkward at formal gatherings, found herself laughing and listening, like she'd always been part of this family. When they raised their glasses for a toast, Eleanor clinked hers gently with Amelia's. "Thank you for bringing new flavor to this table," she said, winking at Julian. He shook his head, but under the table, his hand brushed Amelia's and stayed there warm and firm. Later, the two of them cleaned up together in the kitchen. "My grandmother likes you," Julian said, voice low. Amelia smiled, dimples deepening. "I like her too." "And you?" And gingerbread, of course. She tilted her head teasingly, but her eyes sparkled with something deeper. As they stepped out of the kitchen, the glow of Christmas lights reflected in their eyes. Julian reached for her hand, gentle but sure. For the first time, Amelia didn't feel like just the girl who baked cookies. She felt like a part of his story, a story just beginning, written in flour and sugar and the sweetness of Christmas love. Miss Baker Bakery, tucked on a bustling street corner, glowed beneath the soft winter sun. Its wooden sign was carved with graceful lettering, and through the glass windows, golden croissants, butter cookies, and vibrant passion-fruit tarts sat proudly on display. Amelia Bennett, wearing a crisp white t-shirt and a brand-new apron, stood behind the counter, heart fluttering. Just a year ago, she was a behind-the-scenes pastry chef at Sweet Haven and an anonymous food blogger. Today, Miss Baker wasn't just her very own bakery. It was a name known across the globe, beloved for its easy, heartwarming recipes. It was opening day. The shop was alive with customers, congratulatory bouquets, and familiar faces. Amelia glanced toward the door, just as Julian Pierce stepped inside, punctual as always. For the past year, he'd shown up every morning, buying exactly one pastry, usually a croissant, a nod to their serendipitous meeting at the Daily Brew. Today, he held a small bouquet of lavender, placing it gently on the counter with a soft smile. "Congratulations on the grand opening, Miss Bennett," he said, his voice as warm as his coat. "One croissant." As usual, Amelia smiled, dimples deepening. "Mr. Pierce, it's a special day. Take two." She pushed a warm croissant toward him, her eyes twinkling. Julian accepted it, but didn't leave. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, his expression suddenly more serious. Amelia, distracted by cleaning the counter, didn't notice the shift until the shop bell jingled, and a group of children burst through the door. Leading them was Olivia, now 8, her pigtails bouncing with excitement. "Miss Amy!" she squealed, wrapping her arms around her. "It's so pretty. I brought the whole class to celebrate." The children from the community baking class, now Amelia's regular students, gathered around, pointing excitedly at the cookie displays. Soon, the shop filled with familiar laughter. Eleanor Pierce, Julian's parents, Victor Stone, and Amelia's family, her parents and older brother, all gathered to celebrate. Even Muffin the cat, lounging lazily behind the counter, stretched, yawned, and surveyed the scene like a silent judge. In the bustle, Amelia barely noticed Julian signaling quietly to everyone. When she turned back around, he was standing in front of the counter again, now holding a small box. The bakery fell silent, save for the faint sound of Christmas music playing in the background. "Amelia," Julian began, voice steady but deep enough to steal her heart. "A year ago, I met you in a coffee shop. You were holding a croissant, like it was treasure. I thought I needed 5 minutes to say no and walk away." He paused, locking eyes with her. "But you, with flour on your cheek and that nervous smile, made me stay. I've eaten enough of your pastries to know the one thing I want to keep is you." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, gleaming under the bakery lights. Amelia's hands flew to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. The crowd gasped, and Olivia jumped up and down, shouting, "I knew it, just like in cartoons." You mean it?" Amelia whispered, voice shaking. Julian smiled, a rare, radiant smile that melted her. "More than anything," he said, stepping closer, taking her hand. "Amelia Bennett, will you marry me?" She nodded through her tears and threw her arms around him. Applause exploded through the bakery. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Victor nodded, proud. Amelia's parents beamed with joy. Olivia wedged herself between them, hugging both. "I want to be the flower girl." Amelia laughed through her tears, turning to Julian. "You know what? I want to keep you too," she said softly, then kissed his cheek. Julian, cheeks flushed, pulled her into a full embrace as the crowd cheered. The bakery bustled on, but in the corner, Amelia and Julian stood hand in hand, watching the scene together. Behind the counter, Muffin the cat yawned again and curled up, seemingly satisfied with the ending. Amelia looked around the warmth, the people, the croissant that started it all, and knew, no matter how much the world changed, she'd found the one person she wanted to eat pastries with every single day.